By now you've probably seen all the super heavy samurai one card combos that are still possible with the deck despite the ban list. But what I haven't seen is a lot of combos going over some of the more awkward hands or hands where you don't necessarily open the standard one card starters, and that's what I'm here to show you today. So if you guys enjoy this type of content, then be sure to let me know by leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. But with that being said, let's just hop straight into the very first combo. So for the very first combo, essentially it's just going to be Soul Peacemaker plus any super heavy samurai monster, any like normal summon super heavy except for this. What this does is it still allows you to set up quite a decent board despite not opening any of your starters and opening one of your cards that are typically considered extenders. But in this case, it can actually be used as a starter because it works with any super heavy samurai monster. Alright, so let's just hop straight into the combo. We're going to start by summoning our super heavy samurai monster, equipping the Soul Peacemaker, and then tributing it off to summon out a wagon from the deck. So here in this case, if you started with some like a level 4, for example, like Soul Gaia booster, what you would do is like summon Scales and bring it back. So essentially, like what you want is 2 level 4 machine monsters on the board. So whether that's through Wagon searching Gaia booster or it's through Scales summoning back a level 4, all you need is a way to make Gear Giant X. And then from Gear Giant X effect, you're just going to detach and search any super heavy samurai monster from your deck to your hand. You don't have to go through the motorbike in this combo because, well, you're not going to make Baron unless you have other extenders. But for the sake of this combo, we're just going to go with Wakaushi. So we're going to scale the Wakaushi, summon itself, and then scale the super heavy samurai Big Benkei. Big Benkei is going to add Soul Hordes, and the reason I said you couldn't start with Soul Hordes is because you need it later on in this combo. So unless you play 2 for some reason, you just can't do it with this combo because you need to search it now. So we're going to equip the Soul Horns to the Wakaushi and summon itself out. It doesn't really have an important effect other than the fact that it's an extender. So then we're going to sync her off with these 2 for a super heavy samurai Swordsmaster Musashi. So we're going to go Musashi Chainlink 1 and Wakaushi Chainlink 2 to scale itself. So what Musashi does is essentially targets a machine monster in your grave to add it back to your hand. So in this case, you're just going to add back the level 4 machine. So it doesn't matter which one it is. We already used this effect, but it's just an extra body for us to pendulum summon out later. And the reason why we need to go through this is because it not only scales Wakaushi, but it also gets us a Earth Machine, which is important for the next part of our combo since we're going to be linking the 2 monsters off into Ancient Gear Ballista. So that's going to trigger Ballista effect to add a Ancient Gear box. And then Ancient Gear box is going to allow us to add a copy of Infinitrack Tunneler. So the great thing about this combo is you still get your resources back, you still get the extra 2 draws, and you still set up a fairly okay end board just considering how you started. So what we're going to do now is just pendulum summon the monsters all out, and then overlay the level 4 plus the Ancient Gear box for a Merrymaker. Sargus effect is going to let you add a Therion King Regulus from your deck to your hand. And then from here, you're just going to summon out the Therion King Regulus, equipping any super heavy samurai. It doesn't matter which because we don't have Soul Piercer in rotation. And then from here, we're just going to link these all off into a copy of Appaloosa, which is going to give us 3 monster negates. And then to finish off our combo, we can activate the Tunneler effect to shuffle back any of our super heavy samurai monster or Earth Machine monsters. And usually I just go for all the 1-ofs. I recommend doing something like this, for example. The reason you want to put back Ballista is so your opponent can't use something like Asa the Earth Charmer to take out Link 2. And then, of course, the rest of these are just good for your grind game. So you can put these back, and then you draw 2 blank cards. So even after starting with one of our lesser starters with Soul Peacemaker, you still end on 3 Negate Appaloosa, a Therion King Regulus, and 2 cards in hand. So fairly strong combo despite how we open, and now let's move on to the next one. So since the Scarecrow ban made us lose Soul Piercer as a 1-card starter, another possible way to start your plays with just 1 card aside from the ones that we have access to already is Machina Metal Cruncher. And that's going to be what I'm showing for the second combo, what 1 copy of Metal Cruncher can do for your combo. So for those of you who don't know, Metal Cruncher essentially says if you control no face-up cards, you can just normal summon it without tributing, and when it's normal summon, you get to reveal 3 Earth Machines from your deck, and then your opponent chooses one to add to your hand randomly. So what we're going to do is start by normal summoning the Metal Cruncher, and then Metal Cruncher is just going to reveal 3 copies of Super Heavy Samurai Motorbike, so we're guaranteed to get one to our hand. So we're going to add the Motorbike to our hand, then discard it to add a copy of Wakaushi. Next, we're going to activate the Wakaushi to summon itself and scale the copy of Big Benkei, and then activating the Big Benkei effect to search. What we're going to grab here is Soul Peacemaker. Next, we're going to equip the Soul Peacemaker to our Wakaushi, attributing it to summon out a Super Heavy Samurai Soul Piercer directly from our deck. And then from here, what we're going to do is simply link off the Soul Piercer and the Machina Metal Cruncher. Since it is an Earth Machine, we do get to make Ancient Gear Ballista. That's going to trigger both Ballista and the Soul Piercer effect. So Soul Piercer, you have a couple of different options here. So option 1 is you go Ancient Gear Box, search Tunneler. Soul Piercer searches you the other scale, so you can search Wakaushi. What this does essentially is it gives you either a Baron plus a draw 2, but that's it. Or if you go the other route where you don't search this, what you can do is use Box to add a copy of our General Coral, because it does have 500 defense to fulfill the other Pendulum requirement, meaning our Soul Piercer gets to add us something that we wouldn't necessarily have access to before, that being Scales. So essentially by giving up the draw 2 and the potential follow-up that our Infinite Track Tunneler can give us, what we can do instead is now activate this in the scale and then Pendulum summon this all out. That's going to trigger the Scales effect to summon back the Soul Piercer. And then from here, what we can do very simply is synchro these two off for a copy of Excel. That's going to trigger Excel and the Soul Piercer. And then from here, what we're going to do is just grab any like Super Heavy Samurai extender. It doesn't really matter which one. We'll just grab Stealthy, and then we'll bring back the Motorbike. And then synchroing off these two for a copy of Baron. We're gonna then overlay these two for a copy of our Sargus. Sargus effect is gonna let us add a Therion King Regulus, and then we get to summon out the Regulus by equipping the Soul Piercer. And then finally, to finish things off, we summon our extender and then link these off into a copy of Appaloosa. So essentially, we trade the Infinitrack draw 2 for a extra Appaloosa and a Regulus, plus the search. So I would personally say this one is a little better, even though you don't get access to shuffling your resources back into your deck. At the very least, you still have guaranteed follow-up by having Soul Piercer equipped to Therion King Regulus, so you can still pop it with Baron and go on from there. But at the end of the day, it's totally up to you. If you need the draws to like dig into hand traps or specific side deck cards, then go for that instead. But this is the end board off with just a single Machina Metal Cruncher. So definitely I would recommend considering putting this card into your Super Heavy Samurai list potentially, because it is another one card starter. Just something to mention, it is probably the worst one, however, because 1, you can't Pendulum summon it if you draw it later on in the game. 2, it's also not a Super Heavy Samurai monster, so it doesn't work with like your equipped stuff. So in case this gets stopped, it's pretty hard to play from there. But let's just hop straight into a test hand to just see what this deck can still do. Alright, so getting into our test hand, we're just going to quickly shuffle up and do a going first test hand, and I'm going to be explaining the thought process I go through as to different hand traps I can check for, how I can check for them, as well as how I can try to play through the different hand traps. So we're going to finish shuffling up and then draw our opening 5 cards, which is going to be Soul Peacemaker, Wakaushi, Infinitrack Tunneler, Soul Peacemaker, and a Scales. So this is a handful of Engine, which is pretty solid actually. That means we have a little bit of an easier time to play through hand traps. So what I'm going to do is start with the Wakaushi and then Wakaushi effect to summon itself. If this goes through, you can safely assume your opponent doesn't have Ogre. There's no reason for them to fear Gamma now, because it's so unlikely that you're even like going to see it, much less like play it in the first place. So if this goes through, you can assume your opponent doesn't have Ogre and you shouldn't have to play through it for the rest of the turn. Next, we're going to activate the Big Benkei effect. Big Benkei effect is going to allow us to add a copy of Soul Piercer. I want to get Soul Piercer into rotation because that means later on in our combo, Scales is going to be able to bring it back. We're also going to be able to equip it with Therion King Regulus to get guaranteed follow-up. So I definitely want to access that off of the Big Benkei as soon as possible. Next, we're going to normal summon the Soul Piercer, and then from here, we're simply just going to synchro summon into a copy of our Super Heavy Samurai Sarutobi. If you saw the deck profile, you notice I'm not playing Tilting Entrainment, and I explained the reason for that in the deck profile, so do check it out if you haven't already. But the reason we're making this play is because we want to get Wakaushi into scale as soon as possible, just so we have a completed Pendulum scale, and that we can Pendulum summon even if we do get interrupted in our plays later on. So this is great because it does this before we're able to be Nibiru, so that means we're guaranteed to have full scale setup, plus the search off of Soul Piercer. Here, there are a couple of different options you can go for. Since we already have a Soul Peacemaker and we hard drew Scales, we're gonna want to summon out a wagon directly from our deck. So what I'm gonna do is just add a bike and get it into rotation. And then when we proceed later on in the turn, we can use the bike to get into rotation and then potentially summon Baron. So from here, we're just going to equip the Soul Peacemaker, tributing the Super Heavy Samurai Sarutobi, and then we're going to be able to summon out the copy of Wagon. And then Wagon effect is going to change itself to attack to add any Super Heavy Samurai. And then from here, I'm just going to add the Soul Horns. The reason I'm adding Soul Horns is because we don't need a specific level 4 because we're just going to link it off. And 2, since we already hard drew the Tunneler, I don't think there's a point to go for box and box search General Coral since we already have full skills anyways. So what I'm going to do is just use this sort of as like a throwaway extender to summon itself, and then link for a copy of Cleaver Genius. So at this point, our opponent should be somewhat inclined to consider Nibiru at the very least, because if they don't, our next action can be the Pendulum Summon, and then that can be problematic because Cleaver Genius can then search us a Therion King Regulus guaranteed. But assuming we're all good, we're just going to activate the Motorbike here, and I'm going to add a copy of Wakaushi. The reason I'm adding Wakaushi is because I want a level 4 tuner to summon Baron, but also putting it in the extra deck is great follow-up because that means next turn, as long as your scales don't get cleared, even if your monsters get cleared, you can still Pendulum Summon this out, and it's like a follow-up in a sense. So next up, we're going to just Pendulum Summon our monsters onto the board. That's going to trigger both the Genius and the Scales. Scales is going to be able to summon back the Soul Piercer, and then from here, Genius is actually going to be able to add us a copy of Jizukure. You don't have to add Therion King Regulus here, and that's because we're actually going to be able to get to the Therion King Regulus later on in the combo. So we're just going to synchro these two off for a copy of Excel. That's going to trigger both Excel and the Soul Piercer. Here, you're going to add the Soul Gaia booster and then summon back the Motorbike. Then we're going to synchro summon for a copy of our Baron. And then from here, equip our Gaia booster to Scales to summon itself out. And then we're going to make Sargas, and then Sargas is going to be able to grab us a copy of Regulus. So the reason I'm doing it like this is because having the Kaiju in hand makes it so difficult for your opponent to actually break this board. Because the thing is, even if they break this board, we still have access to a Kaiju to clear whatever they use. So like most of the time it's going to be Zeus. And if you just clear the Zeus, you just win the next turn anyways, because we have guaranteed follow-up the Regulus and the Infinite Tunneler. So next up, we're just going to Link Summon into a copy of Appaloosa, and then Therion King Regulus is going to summon itself, equipping the Soul Piercer. I'd activate Baron here to pop Soul Piercer and add a copy of Motorbike just to thin out our deck a little bit, because when we go to draw, we want to draw into hand traps because that's the one thing our hand is missing. I would just personally shuffle back all like these one-offs, like I mentioned before, and as many extra deck monsters as possible, just so we have the biggest chance of drawing hand traps off of this. So regardless of what you end up drawing off of this is still a pretty formidable board, and without hard going second cards like Dark Ruler and No More, I'd say your opponent's going to struggle breaking this board, especially because we have 1 Omni, 2 Omnis, 3 Monster Negates, and then 2 potential hand traps, and guaranteed follow-up plus a Kaiju. So you can see that this deck is still able to do quite a bit. So I personally don't think this deck is dead, but just do keep in mind that it is going to be a lot more fragile to hand traps unless you open a lot more engine now, so just keep that in mind. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, then let me know by leaving a like, commenting, and subscribing. With that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.